Video for Chapter 1 in Earth Science. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit of the history behind Earth science and progression of science in general. First off, Earth science has been studied in one form or another for millennia. It goes back, I think your book said something about 780 years before Christ, and is when the Chinese started studying earthquake patterns and their occurrences. The Greeks were cataloging rocks and minerals going back to 200 to 300 BC, and the Mayans were developing astronomical calendars astronomy-based calendars that were accurate to within seconds to minutes even a few years ago. What they were capable of without technology is quite amazing. And with all that being said, science generally moves forward slowly, trial and error, test after test. But there have been a few giant leaps in science. One came with the development of the microscope, another with the telescope. So going back into the 1500s and 1600s for the microscope, 1600s for the telescope, this is when the game was changed. Science had moved along slowly for a long time, and with a microscope, we started seeing a world that we thought previously didn't exist. We had no idea that there were germs and protozoas and all the other things you've probably seen under a slide at some point. And telescope was the same thing for the stars and the galaxies. It opened up the imagination. It opened up the human mind to understand that there's far more than just what we could see around us that's on this planet. And with that understanding, everything on this planet relates back to the Earth. The Earth is its home. The Earth is its source of food. The Earth sources its building blocks. Every chemical bond is sourced with calcium and nitrogen and potassium, and all of these come from the Earth. And this is our repository. So everything that we're studying here links back into the Earth. That's why Earth is the study of not only the Earth, but also the universe around it. The branches of Earth science can include, but are not limited to, geology, obviously a huge one, study of the Earth by definition in rocks. Astronomy, gazing up at the heavens. People have been staring at stars for as long as there have been people. And the show is impressive, and it's also interlinked with the Earth. Oceanography, studying the oceans, huge interactions, huge pulls and pushes, a lot of interaction between all of these spheres. And finally, meteorology. If you look at weather patterns, and the point I really want to communicate here is they're all linked. The weather patterns are driven by the oceans, which are influenced by the chemical runoffs from the chemical being any sort of chemistry or ions coming from the Earth. The weather patterns are influenced by the currents in the oceans, and the currents can be dictated by where's there a continent, where is water being blocked, where can it move quicker. And all of these problems are just taken to another level when you look up into the heavens and see the stars and realize that where there are rocks and where there are atmospheres, a lot of these things are occurring in other places. So Earth science truly encompasses pretty much everything you see around you. And humans have a role in all of this. The interactions of humans with the environment is environmental science. We have the capability to protect resources and manage things well. We have the ability to destroy resources. There are places on Earth that will eventually recover, but it's going to take a long time. Humans have destroyed a portion of an ecosystem and made it almost uninhabitable. That being said, humans are kind of a blip in the history of the Earth. It's been around a long time, and our actions will have an impact, but primarily on the human time scale. So there's some responsibility, some role that we have as custodians of the Earth, and it's something to consider as we move through this material in this chapter and the course in general. If we look at Earth science itself, everything we see, from the rivers to the mountains to the ocean and the sky, everything we've already talked about is part of Earth. What we're doing with the science is trying to explain why we see what we see. How did it form? What is the logical progression? What factors were affecting this development? A couple of examples here on your right there is Lake Bled, Slovenia, by far the prettiest place I've ever been in my life. Absolutely gorgeous. And you see the trees and the mountains and the lake, and people have been asking, why is there a lake here? Why did mountains form here but not other places for a long time? And scientists have come a long way toward understanding. On the left is Antelope Canyon, National Park out west. And these breathtaking scenery, it's all a function of what's going on in the environment in that area. It's all connected. I cannot say that enough. It keeps coming back to it over and over and over. With that in mind, we start looking at science as a process. How do we explain these things? You've been shown the scientific method, my guess is in every science class since somewhere around second grade, and they start off with the idea of a question and maybe a hypothesis, and then into experiment and data and analyzing into a report, and that's wonderful. But that's frequently not the way it works. There are just as many times that hypotheses are rejected. The data didn't work out. There was a problem analyzing it. Your report got rejected. You had to go back to the starting board. Maybe you've got a technique and you want to use it to explore something else, and you're not even asking a question. You're just saying, let's apply this over here. So I don't mean to trivialize the fact that scientific method is worthless. It's absolutely not. These are important steps, and each of these is used in time. It just doesn't always follow this exact progression. So with that in mind, it's important to realize that earth science studies nature, and nature's complicated. We don't always get it right the first time. Sometimes a lot of experiments are required. So picking these apart, like I said, each portion is important. Observation, the key to science. Taking a look around you and paying attention. People have been doing this for a long time, and we're still learning all sorts of new material and new things because people are still looking around and saying, that looks strange. I wonder what's going on, which leads us to the hypothesis/interpretation. I personally like observation interpretation, but hypothesis is what's used in most books. Hypothesis is asking the intelligent question. It's trying to look around you and say, I bet this is the reason this is happening. After that, you test your hypothesis. When you're running a test, there are a handful of different things to consider, one of which being the structure of the test itself. Most tests will include an independent variable, a dependent variable, and a control group. So your independent variable is something you can control. This is what you're setting. This is before you get ready, if you're going to look at creating light in an experiment. You're the one that's going to strike the match. The match is going to burn at a set rate. It's going to be one point of ignition, and there's a bunch of different things we could talk about here, but it's what you control. The dependent variable is going to be what happens as a response to the independent variable. So independent, you struck a match. Dependent, oh look, this type of wood burned hotter or longer, or whatever it is you're testing. It produced more light. Control group, this is what happens when you're not testing something. You're not experimenting. So if you're testing the amount of light that wood produces, well, it's zero if you don't light it on fire, or very little. So control group is whatever treatment is not received. So there's a lot of different options and explanations here, but control group doesn't get the treatment. It doesn't receive the independent variable the way that the rest of the example has. I'll include a video here with an example. If you're interested, you can watch that and get a little bit more detail. Actually running the experiment, there's a set of rules that most people use. And if you start looking at this, one is the units. The vast majority of the world uses the metric system. This is abbreviated SI, it's System International, my best French accent there. If you look, and that's the units that are used. They're base 10. The reason this works is if you think about the English system, we all remember there are 12 inches in a foot and 3 feet in a yard. Well, let's take that further. How many yards in a mile? How many inches in a mile? All of a sudden, these numbers start to become cumbersome and awkward. If you look at base 10 systems, there are 100 centimeters in a meter. There are 100 meters in a hectometer, 1,000 meters in a kilometer. So if I ask you how many centimeters are in a kilometer, all you have to do is move the decimal point, one way or the other, depending on what the question is. So base 10 systems have their advantages. They are much easier to use. The other thing that you'll be looking at for your experiment is the difference between accuracy and precision. Maybe you've got both. The example down there shows arrows grouping and they're all right at the bullseye and they're all clustered together. Accuracy is how close are you to the actual measurement? How close do you represent the actual real world value? Precision is how close were you when you made those measurements. I'll include another short video here if you'd like a little bit more explanation on accuracy and precision. For the actual experiment, one thing that we have to consider is there is error. There's no way around it. It's not right or wrong. It's just something that exists. If you ask me, how far is it to measure from the front to the back wall of the classroom? I can tell you it's 430 centimeters, and that's obviously a gross understatement, but whatever unit of measure I'm taking. Well, it's probably not exactly that number of centimeters. More than likely, you're looking at a decimal value of something, and there's some error that gets associated with every measurement. There's a couple ways that this is expressed. Sometimes it's a percentage. So if you wanted to say, oh, how much salt is in seawater? Well, maybe you would say it's got 95 grams in a given volume. Well, 95 plus or minus. So you say we're good at about 3%. So maybe there's 98 grams, maybe there's 92 grams, but it's represented as a percent error. If you go up, if you say I've got a much larger volume, maybe there's 1,000,000 grams, and then it's plus or minus 400 or plus or minus 600. It's all based on percent error. Your confidence interval is the other side of that. So if I said, oh, the average test score here, or the test scores were 96, plus or minus 3 points. Maybe people made a 99, maybe people made a 93, but they were all clustered together. So that has to do with statistics. We won't get too deep into that, but keep in mind that the smaller the error, the smaller the percentage, the smaller the plus or minus, that means the more accurate, or excuse me, the more precise the data. For the actual experiment, we frequently can't test whatever we're looking at. If we're looking at a mountain, or if we're looking at how pine trees grow to 100 feet tall, we probably can't grow those in a lab. The mountain won't fit, nor will the pine trees. So at some point, we have to start using models. We have to start measuring pieces of what we're investigating. Some of the options I give in your book, 3D models, maps are a representation of the Earth. Sometimes you can use maps to make models. Mathematical models, computer models, all of these are different options, and they're used by scientists to help explain what's going on in the world around us. When you've completed your work and you're happy with it, and you say, okay, I've got what I need here, these are the numbers, this looks good, I've tested it, I've verified it, people will turn around and say, okay, I'm going to publish a paper. So they're going to send it off to peer review, which is someone that you've most likely never met before, who's going to tell you, yes, this makes sense, or no, this doesn't. The idea here is it helps prevent bad science. It helps keep people from getting their papers published when they really shouldn't be. If it's accepted, it's published in a journal. Sometimes these are online, sometimes these are in print. A lot of things are changing there, but that's considered the kind of the gold standard for research is when it's published. When you get a lot of papers and a lot of hypotheses that all come together and start supporting an idea, it's called a theory. When you get lots of theories and hypotheses, especially when they come from different fields of science, so meteorology and oceanography and geology, and all of these different ideas come together, and no one finds an exception to an idea anywhere, it becomes a law. So most of you are familiar, you've heard the story of Newton. He was sitting under an apple tree, apple fell, hit him in the head, he came up with gravity. It's the law of gravitational forces, the law of gravitational attraction. This is a law. There are very few laws that are created now. I don't know of any. But a lot of the things that have never been disproven, they give the title law there. The last thing I want to leave you with is science and society interact. Science is pushing frontiers that people would have never dreamed possible 100 years ago, certainly not 200 years ago. And it's starting to bring up questions in society that we have to answer, ethical questions. Just because we can do something, should we? So there's a lot of hot button issues out there, and I don't have the answer to all of this, but if you look at gene editing and the idea that people could start picking the gender of their children or start giving them blonde hair and blue eyes versus whatever genetics they would normally have. Nuclear weapons. Certainly, it's been there, it's been used, it's been tested extensively, and there's still a lot of controversy about it. Nuclear fusion and fission are still a source of an amazing amount of power produced around the world, but the question again comes back to safety and whether or not they should be weaponized. Cloning, huge hot button issue. They've done it to sheep and a number of other animals. Is human cloning something that should be allowed? Well, a lot of people say no, some people say yes, and there's reasons for both, or arguments on both sides, I should say. Genetically modified organisms, so people that are changing the structure of food. Again, pluses and minuses. Farmers are growing more, they're getting larger yields than they ever have before. There's more people on the planet than they've ever had before. But is it changing the nutrition value? Is it changing the genetic structure? Are we endangering ourselves eating these foods? And again, I don't have the answer to all of these. I'm just showing you that there are some controversies that exist in the scientific world. So with that in mind, this is your intro to science. This is your beginning of the course. This covers all of Chapter 1, and hopefully it's made sense and you've enjoyed it.